On behalf of the Tattered Cover Bookstore, it's my pleasure to welcome you and to thank you for your support. It is a great time for the performing arts in Denver. The Tattered Cover has an ongoing series with the Denver Center Theater Company called DCTC at the TC. But it is such a momentous occasion that Denver was chosen to host the launch of the national tour of the 5-time Tony Award-winning production of Peter and the Starcatcher that we're expanding the series to Broadway at the TC. Ridley Pearson is an old friend of the Tattered Cover. Along with Dave Barry, Ridley
This is
wrote...
an old trope.
And as he gets on in years, he needs some help. So along with Dave Barry, Ridley wrote the best-selling book, Peter and the Starcatchers, the book upon which the musical play was based. Rick Elice, who wrote Jersey Boys, is our playwright who crafted the script of Peter and the Starcatcher. And Roger Rees, who has credits a mile long on both sides of the Atlantic, is our extremely talented director. Today, we're delighted to also welcome CBS 4 critic at large Greg Moody to help facilitate the conversation. Would you please join me now in making them all feel welcome?
It's an honor to be here with you today and to know that I'm the oldest one up here. We only have a short amount of time with Roger, as we get to sit around and drink this afternoon, but he has to go work. So we will start with Roger as we talk about this, but please, at any point in this, if you'd like to ask questions, if you have any questions about the show, the process, whatever, please raise your hand. We'll jump in and we'll get your question asked. First, Roger, when did your input with this show begin? Was the script finished? Was it still in development? At what point did you get involved?
I think this book was being considered by the Walt Disney Company to be made into either a live-action movie or an animated movie, and I think they've been talking about it and trying to find different ways to do it. You know, and with a clever book like this, you've got to make the right decisions about such a thing. And I think they've been to many different directors, and it laid fallow for a little bit while they were trying to find some people who had a really inceptive idea about it. And at that time, I believe there was a conversation between Rick Elice and Tom Schumacher, the brilliant man who runs Disney Theatrical, who's responsible for Lion King and Aida and Mary Poppins, and very shortly the new Aladdin. And Rick suggested that Tom might ask me to, because I was running a theatre called the Williamstown Theatre Festival, to see if I couldn't take this book and stand it up into its 3 dimensions, and what we call page to the stage. And and then Tom did come to me and he said, there's this wonderful, wonderful children's book that children just adore. And the authors, who of course subsequently I met, these delightful men, but they gone on to write, sequels, and there's a whole series of these books. And he said, but this first book, Peter and the Starcatchers, really warrants being done in a stage manner that was similar to a production I was in a long, long time ago, in the black and white days of theatre, when it was called Nicholas Nickleby. It was a production by the Royal Shakespeare Company, and when it was done on a bare stage, promoting the audience's imaginations. Many actors played many parts, and the original, thank God, Peter and the Starcatchers was not this long, but the original Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens was 800 pages long. And at one point, that production was 15 hours long. So we cut it down to 8.5. But I was in that anyway, and I played the eponymous hero, Nicholas Nickleby. So I've been associated with that production, and it was directed by Trevor Nunn and John Kerr. And so Tom Schumacher rather cleverly said, well, perhaps you'd like to try to make something out of this book in that manner. And so there was a very, very clever young director at Williamstown at that moment called Alex Timbers, who I'm sure you've heard of because he's an up-and-coming, wonderfully clever man. And I liked him very much, and I had invited him to Williamstown to put on the first sketch of a musical called Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson. which went on to Broadway, and he's gone on. He's just opened Love's Labours in the Park, and he's going to direct Rocky on Broadway next year. So he's an up-and-coming lad. But we got on very well, and he's a very anarchic young man, and I'm a very formal old fart, really. And so we fit together perfectly because we like the same sort of theatre. So I asked him to join me in trying to put this thing on its feet. I'll finish this story by saying the first time we did that, we had 7 apprentices for 5 days, and we went to the prop shop at Williamstown, and we got some rope and a stuffed seagull and some buckets and a chair, and we tried to improvise with I'd done some sketches, we talked a lot, and we tried to stand it up on its feet. Tried to make do you know, like in Nicholas Nickleby, there's a clever thing. Think about this. If I'm playing Nicholas Nickleby, I can say, Nicholas Nickleby got up, and I could get up, right? Or this person over here could say,
Nicholas Nickleby got up.
Or I could just get up, right? Well, if you think about things like that, it gets very, very interesting using a narrative voice in the theatre. So that's what except what?
Except for the getting up part.
The getting up, I can't, I'm too old to get up anymore, you see, that's what's happening. But anyway, so we were exploring those sorts of things, and at the end of those 5 days, we thought we had a little something. We did another workshop a little later, and Dave and Ridley came. And for that workshop, we needed some dialogue, so I asked Rick to write some dialogue just to help us through this thing. And at that point, I think the whole thing started to form together. Yeah.
You didn't really move much beyond the couple of buckets and the piece of rope.
We still have the piece of rope and a couple of buckets, and the stuffed seagull is exactly the same one that we used all those years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how did you realize this is where we should stay with this? This is where we'll pull in the imagination.
We planned to do a production that seemed as though it was a production that was made 12 years after the original production. We wanted to do a production that was the reboot. You know, there was a grand production of Peter and the Starcatcher somewhere, and then 12 years later there was our production, just using a few sticks, a bit of rope, and a couple of buckets, and the audience's imagination. And that was our plan. So we didn't describe anything, we let everything, like a radio play, live within the audience's mind. So there's no pirates who wear 3-cornered hats. Unfortunately for you, there's no parrots, but the parrots exist in your mind. And that's what we try to do. There's no big ships, but the ships exist in your mind. And with a couple of ropes, some buckets, and some a stuffed seagull, we can throw people overboard, we can climb mountains, we can capture people, we can throw people down crevices, and we can make people fly without any wires. So that's what we try to do. And apparently it's sort of working, so that's why we're in.
Well, I've got to tell you, I'm still in love with the birds that chase everybody around.
Yeah, there's crazy birds who come on stage and chase everyone around, and you might recognize them if you come to see the play.
And you must go see it. You must go see it. Does anyone have a question for Roger? Ma'am.
Hi, Roger.
Hi.
As a fellow Brit.
Thank God for you, madam.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Where in England are you from? And did you work on both sides of the pond, or mostly?
I do. I was recently playing in Waiting for Godot in London with Ian McKellen, because Patrick Stewart had done it for some time, and then he went off to make a movie. So I did it with Ian, and then we went round to Australia, New Zealand, and Cape Town. In Cape Town, we performed Waiting for Godot on our Monday nights off in the townships there, in the open air. It was an extraordinary experience, life-changing experience. But I go back, and I just did I have a one-man Shakespeare show called What You Will, and I've done that recently at the Apollo Theatre in the West End for a short run. And so I go backwards and forwards. I hate the English, I'm Welsh, so, you know, it's okay. Sorry, darling. And like that. I was for many years. I was first of all. I was an art student. I was going to be a fine artist, a painter of pictures. And in my third year at the art school, my father died, so I had to paint scenery. And I started to be in the theatre. And at the end of that year, I was painting a Christmas pantomime at a theatre in Wimbledon in South London. And the man who ran that theatre as a weekly rep theatre, one of the last great theatre managers, a man called Arthur Lane, saw me up on the paint frame one day, and he said, "Would you like to be in a play the week after next?" I was 17 years old, I was a young man, he wanted a young man to be in the play. And so I was so flattered, I said yes, and I've never painted scenery since. It's amazing. But the thing about that was he paid me £4 a week for painting scenery, and I got £3 a week for being in the play.
Anyone else for Roger? Yes, ma'am.
I am thrilled to say that I actually got to see the production of Broadway. I would say it's one of the best, most imaginative, fabulous, physical things that I've seen probably ever. And I can't wait to see it here, see the touring production. I wonder if you'd address a little bit of the physicality of the show, because it is our imagination, but you really do create walls and waves and everything else with the actors' bodies and the actors' imagination. Getting to that, how difficult, how much of a work in progress is that going to be?
Well, there's a wonderful team. Stephen Hoggett did a lot of the movement stuff, and Patrick, who's our movement associate, has taken that to heart and is working on it. Lily King, who's our assistant director, is fantastic. There's such a great team. Marco and the four creative people, Darren West, who did the sound, Paloma Young, who did the costumes, Danielle Worley, who did the set, and Jeff Kreuter, who did the lighting. They all won Tony Awards for this production. This production you'll see when you come tonight, if you will see it when it's here. So it's a very strong-minded team, but the great thing to celebrate is these actors. There's 12 actors, only one of whom's been associated with before, so they've only been together for about a month. They're bonded at the heart, really, because it's they work every day, they work out every day, they run together, they sing together. It's a very Marxist production when I think about it. We're all together in this, but it's wonderful because of that, and there's nothing they won't do to tell the story, and there's nothing I won't demand of them to tell the story. And that's what's fantastic about this experience. But my heart goes warmly out to the actors because they're extraordinary. They never leave the stage. There's 11 men and 1 girl. There's 2 musicians as well who are spectacularly involved in it because it's a very percussive evening. But there's wonderful music by Wayne Barker too, which will thrill you too. But it's made like a piece of Cirque du Soleil crossed with a production of The Wild Duck, I think, really.
But to your question, in talking to one of the understudies one time at a cocktail event or something, I said, what's it like to, because I believe some of the understudies had 2 or 3 roles that were prepared.
5 each.
Or 5, yeah. And this person said, he or she, I think it was a he, said, well, it's one thing to learn all these lines. Rick's marvelous, inventive, beautiful lines. And he said, but then in this production, you have to be in an exact spot at an exact time, or you will run into somebody, or they will run into you, or the chest will not get across the stage at the right mark. And I had watched a little bit of tech rehearsal where they worked through some of this. And in one of the days I watched, they spent at least 45, maybe 90 minutes with one actor sliding a chest to the middle of the stage. Now when you see it live, the person just slides it right out there. But it's exactly where it needs to be. And to his point was, it was one thing to learn the lines, but all the movement in this thing is a whole nother piece of knowledge you need, or you can't play these roles.
Yeah, it's true that it's that the actors are numb with repetition, but what's lovely is that people come and see the play and they say, are they just making the words up? Are they just... It's very playful, I think, but it's very regimented and mathematical, in fact.
One of the scenes that I dearly love, and I don't want to give it away, deals with Black Stash and the trunk near the end of the show. How did you know when to cut that off? It goes on for a long time and really depends on the audience building with it. How did you know when to let that go and cut off that
Good
off?
theatre, good theatre is like music, and this is like a piece of jazz, and it syncopates with whatever audience is there each night. So it's the same notes, the same reference points, the same intervals, but it's you can lean on something, you can pull it back, you can make something faster. And so things change, even though they're exactly the same every night. The wonderful thing about a play is it's not like a movie. When you film a movie, you just get rid of that scene and you never ever do it again. The next day you get rid of those scenes, you never do them again. But a play, you have this wonderful thing. You do everything each night. And it's a thrilling thing. We love to do that. And so I think that my answer to that is it's tailored in some ethereal, magical way to what the audience needs that night. It's the rhythm of comedy, it's the rhythm of tragedy. You know, they say it's much harder to make people laugh than it is to make people cry, but it's the two things are very, very strongly intermingled in this production, I think. And so, yeah, the dictates of just the mood of everyone, what people want, dictates the rhythm of the show. Yeah.
I would just add to that, or to sort of demystify it a little bit. The secret is being a good listener. I think probably the secret to almost anything in life is being a good listener. Certainly, it's the secret of being a good conversationalist. It's the secret of being a good writer. It's the secret of being a good director. It's also the secret of being a good actor. So when you have in a script something that's written, and the actor who is cunningly chosen by the director because of something that he or she shows in an audition. One of the ways you hire the actor is a sense of not just what they can present, but how well they listen, not just to the other actors on stage, because that of course is essential, but how well they listen to the audience, because there is a dialogue always between the audience and the actors on stage, moment to moment to moment to moment, which is why it's so interesting when a dog walks out on stage, or a child, creatures who are alive who don't stop living to be on stage, the way some lesser actors sometimes do. You know, you sort of feel like it's kind of wrote by the numbers. And life always trumps everything else. And part of the life of the stage is what's happening between the audience and the actor. So if the actor hears a laugh building, the actor has then permission in one or two moments in the play that function as cadenzas to shall we say, milk that cow, and not to put too fine a point on it. And if the laugh is subsiding, then the actor knows that's the cue, as if it were a gunshot out of a cannon. That's the cue to go on to the next thing. So it's not so much about the result may feel magical, but it's really craft. It's the same way that, you know, to build a chair, you've got to put nails in certain places. You've got to pay attention to the audience, and the same way the audience is paying attention to you.
And we, and I use that word loosely, watch that moment that you're referring to evolve under Roger's direction and under the hands of capable actors, as it was in La Jolla. It was a few lines.
What's fun about it is that it's a moment that's an act that's described in the novel that Ridley and Dave wrote in very much the way we've always accepted. This is about how a particular individual loses his hand, and it's described in the novel in the way we have accepted this as happening since 100 years ago when James Barrie wrote this play called Peter Pan, and the novel, that is the reboot of the story, accepts that explanation of what really happened. And the play, in several ways, as a way of adapting a novel which is written for one purpose and a play which is written for another purpose, adapting that play from the novel, Ridley and Dave very generously gave us permission to change things. Now, when you change accepted history, you're kind of making a big statement. It's sort of like coming along and saying, after the fact, Anthony Weiner didn't stop when he said. Right? But the reason that we all laugh is because when he said, "Oh, I stopped, I don't do this anymore," we all paid attention to that, we all accepted it, and then suddenly it wasn't true anymore. But for the while that it was true. It was true. It was printed on the newspapers being true, but it was actually not true. So we investigated the writing of the play with the premise of, well, suppose it's not actually true, all this stuff that we've accepted. Suppose it's not the way things really happened. Because on stage, it's sort of hard to have somebody have his hand cut off in a battle and have it be acceptable, because movies have made all of that stuff so glaringly real that it's hard to accept it if it's less than that. And it can, obviously, the actor can't lose his hand every night because it'd be very expensive to keep on hiring new actors. So, so for practical purposes, this particular moment in the play is original to the play, based on an event that takes place in the novel, which is based on something that takes place in a play that was written 100 years ago. And in that sense, it's one of the most gratifying chain of events in terms of the life of this project.
And here's the brilliance of a writer adoring another writer, is that the writer of the play can pull this off with amazing skill, and then, like some sort of stealth hunter out in the snow, cover his tracks. So he does all this, and then brilliantly, about 3 lines later, covers his tracks, so you go, oh! I mean, it's amazing.
It is an amazing moment on stage. I will tell you that. It reminds me of the best bits of Laurel and Hardy at their greatest. It is truly
Laurel and
amazing.
Hardy, that's 2 for the price of 1.
Yeah. You get them both in one character. Roger, one last question, because I do know you have to leave. Was there any problem for you to take this show? It is so intimate, both on Broadway and off Broadway. You are right there. You are part of the action. Mm-hmm. You almost become a lost boy on stage, or a mollusk. Yeah. How did you retain that intimacy and still expand it for, 2,000-seat houses?
Well, that's what we do. In Victorian times, actors used to wear a lot of makeup around their eyes, and they used to act like this, because they were in big houses and there was no microphones and everything. And what happens to the theatre, sadly, is that people are very used to close-ups in movies and things like that. So we have our own devices. But I think the biggest thing is that being truthful, and being telling a story lovingly, that will build to any size. We're playing into bigger houses than we've ever played to before on this tour. But I've been all around this theatre here, and you can see and hear everything. It's fantastic. No one's going to be left out in any way, no matter how much the tickets cost or how little they have to pay. Anybody seeing this in that wonderful, wonderful theatre you have here, the Ellie Hawking Theatre, it's going to be tremendous wherever you sit. And I'm pleased about that, but I think it's about the truth of this group of actors. They're just wonderfully, urgently wanting to tell this story. Communicating is everything, really, and so I'm pretty sure that you're going to have a good time wherever you sit. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Any last question for Roger? Yes, ma'am.
I saw last night the dress rehearsal.
Oh, yeah.
And we were all laughing at everything. It was a wonderful production and everything. We were all looking forward to it and got to see it.
You are
Well,
marvelous.
you come right on up here and sit next to us.
I also were around, and so we're all like all the actors.
No, you were lovely. We had an invited dress rehearsal last night, just to get going, and you were a wonderful audience. You were really smart, and you were the best person in the audience. Yeah.
Roger, thank you.
No, I'm going to go and do some more work, so it's a bit better for you.
Thank you for your time.
When I was a boy, I wished I could fly.
Peter and the Starcatcher, a grown-up's prequel to Peter Pan and winner of 5 Tony Awards. A tale filled with magic, romance, comedy, and adventure. The New York Times says it's the most exhilarating Broadway storytelling in decades, and Entertainment Weekly calls it absurdly funny. Don't miss Peter and the Starcatcher.
Plays the Ellie August 15th through September 1st only. Tickets at denvercenter.org or call 303-893-4100.
Ridley, this is yours and Dave's baby.
Yeah, let's underline Dave's baby.
Okay, but you had to hand off your baby to someone else who was going to bend and pull and shove it in all kinds of different directions. How did you feel when you did that?
Well, I think in this business, you always accept that anything you do in novel form, long form, that's reduced to stage or theater may end up. I had one piece where I had a crime novel where it was going to be turned into a film, and they changed one of the characters first to a female and then to an Hispanic female. And originally it was a male guy or a white guy and thing. So I mean, the production can do whatever they want with it, and you learn to accept that. It's like selling a house. If you sell the house, which is what you do, you get paid to do this. You sell the rights to this, and you can't go back a month later to the new owners and say, you really must leave the kitchen yellow. They're going to say, who the heck are you? And so once you hand these things over to a Tom Schumacher or whomever, you have to just kind of grin and bear it. In this case, it was the exact opposite process. It was, we handed it over lovingly, and then found out that it was being, you know, cradled and cherished by the people to whom we had sold it. And Rick and I were at that Williamstown, at the Williamstown reading, which was really where they had torn pieces of our book almost out and were just reading it. And these guys were so lovely because Dave and I at this point have nothing to do with the production. We've sold it. And I had said to Tom Schumacher that I'm a curious guy. I always like to learn. I love the theater. I grew up just outside of New York, went into the theater all the time. And that anything he could share with me in how this goes from a book to the stage, I would just love to witness, because I love, from the smell of makeup to the heat of the lights, I just love being around it. And he included me, and Dave by extension, although Dave was busy and not as interested, an invitation to everything. So I got invited to Williamsburg to sit in the corner, to Williamstown, to sit in the corner and watch these guys read the thing. Well, there was this wonderful man named Rick Elice, who I didn't even know. We met his sort of first name. This is Rick, this is Ridley. Oh, great, you know. And we sat down for about a 2-hour meeting, I think, afterwards, and we all talked about what meant something to us in the production, what we thought was good, what we thought was bad. And they listened to you and write notes down. And then we heard a guy was writing some pieces to it. And about a year later, Dave and I went out to New York in the basement of a church. And in fact, a guy named Rick Elice, oh, this is the guy I met in Williamstown. I didn't know he was Rick Elice. None of this connected at the time, you know, that he was the Jersey Boys guy and all of that. All of that was actually just sort of happening at that point, I think. Maybe it had just happened. And it was fabulous. They'd done about 6 scenes, and they were just so moving and funny and poignant, and they were just terrific. And we said, well, you know, where will it go? I mean, how do you make a story out of these 5? They were very disjointed pieces. They were just randomly throughout the piece. And they said, well, we're going to have a little meeting afterwards. So in the meeting afterwards, Rick goes backstage somewhere and brings out this foam core sheet, or even tube, that had the full outline of the entire play on it. And Dave and I sat there and read through the cards. And Dave nudges me and he goes, where was this guy when we were writing our book? And we knew we were in great hands, because he had taken this sort of clumsily written book that stumbles all over itself, found the gems in it, reduced it down to something, and as time would show, really didn't stick to the book at all. He made his own piece. But he caught exactly what the book's about, what those characters are about. How any of that's done is the magic of theater, and Rick just understands that magic.
Rick, in doing that, in finding what was in that book, what was the through line that you found there? Was it in character, atmosphere, plot, or story? What was it that you found that said, this is what I can work with for the stage and pull this story right through to the closing curtain?
Well, first of all, Roger and Alex had spent a lot of time with the novel and with a guy from Disney named Ken Chernelia, who functioned as what's called a dramaturg, but really sort of, he's like a great story editor. And the three of them had gone through the novel and started to identify some organizing principles, because it's a novel, you know, you can read a novel in a week or a month or 6 months, you can put it down and come back to it. It's up to you, but a play has to begin at 8 o'clock and it's got to be over by 10 o'clock, and it has to be done over and over and over again. And so it's a kind of different, you need to figure out what you're going to include and what you're going to exclude. So they came up with certain organizing principles that helped with inclusion and exclusion of the rangy, picaresque material in this novel. And so we made this board that Ridley just talked about, which was sort of an outline, really, that's all. It's an outline of scenes, and it seemed sort of doable to me. But I think my attention really didn't turn to the play as it is now until we were doing it in La Jolla, in Southern California, where Roger had a relationship with the guy who is running the theater, and he invited us to take part in this page-to-stage program. So we came out there with a very unwieldy script, about 160 pages long, you know, as opposed to 110 pages, which is what it is now. Overlong, obviously, lots of side trips, not sure what would work, so there was no reason to cut things out because maybe things would work and maybe things wouldn't. And a group of very willing actors, half from New York, half from Southern California, and we had 4 weeks to rehearse this brand new thing that had never been spoken out loud before. And we got it up on its feet, and because the production was always intended to be very simple, the fact that we had no budget was not a deterrent. And so the thing that was on stage looked very much like what was in the director's minds all along. But the great thing about this process is that it's 24 performances and there's no press, so you don't feel the pressure of critics coming to judge the work. And every night, it's about 150 people or so in the audience, and every night the audience is invited to stay and talk back, like this. And you can sit there on stage and ask questions, or you can stand in the back like I did and listen to the audience, try to actually hear what they're saying, or try to hear what they're not saying, which can actually be more helpful critically. And one of the things that I heard that, because of what they were saying, what they weren't saying, was that the central character of this boy who becomes Peter Pan was not developed. He was sort of like this feisty leader kid, you know, that sort of image that we all have of Peter Pan with the hands on hips and, you know, sort of a, you know, chin out kind of attitude. Yeah, you know, you think you're big, you know, sort of like a young James Cagney kind of a guy. And he was like that at the beginning, and he's followed around by some boys who are subordinate to him, his sidekicks, and at the end of the play, he becomes the character Peter Pan. But he didn't really change, he didn't really grow. And in a play, it's really important, it turns out, that happens. And, I kind of knew it, but at first I found it very irritating that people were like, well, what do you mean nothing happens to him? All this stuff happens. He goes here, he does this, he cuts this. What do you mean nothing happens? And I kept hearing plot when what they were really saying was theme, character, what's this play really about? A great writer who's no longer with us named Arthur Lawrence, who wrote some really, really great Broadway shows and some great movies, used to say to me, what's it about? And don't tell me the plot, tell me what it's really about. And if you can't tell me that in one sentence, you better figure it out before you start writing it. You've got to be able to answer that question. And I realized I didn't have an answer to that question. It wasn't hard to figure out what the answer could be, but I had never addressed the play in that way. That's what I mean by I'm sort of thinking of it casually, like, oh, I'll adapt this novel and then I'll do something else. But actually, when you need to commit, so I committed to it, and in committing to it, I thought, okay, this wants to be sort of a Joseph Campbell hero's journey story, right out of the monomyth, you know, like Indiana Jones or Luke Skywalker. I know exactly how to do this, because those stories always follow the same arc of events. Except there was one problem. There's this girl. This boy, this stuff isn't going to happen to this boy without this chance meeting with this girl. So how do you write a Joseph Campbell story? And figuring out how to write sort of a Joseph and Josephine Campbell story was the thing that became really interesting to me. And that is the reason that we dropped the S. You may think that we dropped the S from the title of the novel just because we couldn't afford that S. Which, you know, might very well have been true, but the real reason we dropped the S was because in figuring out how to write this bifurcated hero's journey, rewrite the play so that something really happens to this boy and this girl, it became a two-hander, in essence. Even though there's 100 other characters in the story, it became a two-hander. It became Peter and the Starcatcher. And that was my pitch back to the producers to say, I know I'm not allowed to change the title, but can I just drop that S? Because that's the essential difference. The play is about this boy and this girl and what happens because of the chance meeting, as opposed to the much larger world of Peter and the Starcatchers that Ridley and David did.
The process, I gotta take 2 seconds.
Sure.
Because for those lay people like me, who are the fly on the wall watching this process of a book become a play. La Jolla was unbelievable to me because these, you know, if we had 150 people, 25 or 50 people would stay and make comments. Rick, the directors, Ken, the dramaturg, and others were there to listen. But then this man would go back to his hotel and start writing at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and I don't know to what hour you wrote, but he would come back the next morning at 9 a.m., 10 a.m., with a new script. Lines that were in the original script gone, new lines written in this script, and those actors had to forget what they knew last night and learn what he'd written tonight and put it on that night. And then a crowd would diminish from 150 to 30. They'd make their comments. This guy would go back into the hotel, rewrite it again. They'd meet at 10 o'clock, and this went on for 5 weeks, 4.5 weeks. And it was.
I blocked it out.
Oh my God! To see, for one thing, to understand. You know, we always say, "Oh, what a great actor," but this is acting. These guys have to forget that this line follows that line. Now, this line follows that line, and I'm not going to walk across stage. I'm going to go that. And how they all do. As a layman watching this, you just go, "Oh my gosh!" And as a fellow writer, you look at Rick's effort, where he must have been writing till 3 a.m. and then getting all these copies of this thing to these people by 10 a.m. and they work it all, and it went night after night after night after night. It was amazing, and it was a different play. 4.5 or whatever it was weeks
It was
later.
the copying that was the hardest part. you know, there's never a printer that works when you need a printer. This man is very, very sweet, but when you work in the theater, these the great theater writers have passed down certain things that could be printed on T-shirts. You know, here's another one. Writing is rewriting. And that's probably true in whether you're writing a novel, whether you're writing a TV show, but in the theater it certainly is rewriting. What's crazy about the theater is that there's this period of time, you know, there's a time when you have all the time in the world to write something because you're not on the clock. Then when rehearsals start and unions come into play, suddenly you're on the clock and you have to stay up. It's not, you know, like going home and going to bed is just not an option. You're not going to do that during that period of time. You have to come up with something. So, but because the process was so beautifully organized, you know, it's like making a list at any time. You know, when you want to organize your desk or you want to organize your life, you make a list and you start ticking the things off. And I would tick a couple of things off each night and then test them. Neil Simon, obviously a great writer. I worked in advertising for many years, and I used to advertise shows. And I once was working on a play that Neil Simon wrote, and it was a great play. It went on to win the Pulitzer Prize, called Lost in Yonkers. And he was sitting in the back of the theater one night during previews with a yellow legal pad. He was making furious notes. And it's Neil Simon, right? You know, so I'm this schnuggy kid, and I go, Mr. Simon, I'm like, what are you writing? Like, you're not watching me. What are you writing down? He said, I'm doing rewrites. And I said, you are doing rewrites? I mean, but the audience is loving this play. And he said, if you had a chance to take a test every day, and today you get a B, wouldn't you try to get an A tomorrow? That's Neil Simon. You know, so of course, if you can think of writing that way, I mean, the artsy-fartsy part of it, oh, you know, I plug into the muse and I'm inspired and I craft beautiful sentences. That's great. You know, there are writers who, God bless them, are like that. And then there are the writers who, you know, like sharpen the pencil and, you know, and close the shades and sit, you know, fill the glass with bourbon and say, okay, now what am I going to, how do you actually get from here to there? And that sort of crafty part of it, even Neil Simon, Tom Stoppard, you know, William Shakespeare. It was just in the paper the other day, right? Because he had bad handwriting, he was cheated out of credit for this Spanish prisoners thing, and then finally just figured out it's because his handwriting was bad, not his writing was bad. They would say, this couldn't be written by Shakespeare, it's not good writing. No, it was just bad handwriting. And the people who read the bad handwriting misinterpreted what the words were and made bad lines. When they figured out that the S was really an F, suddenly it all made sense and sounded like Shakespeare. Craft, you know, and that for me is that's the great pleasure. I can't believe I get to do what I do because I get to try to be better every day. and you can see some, and you know, it's very frustrating when you can't, and sometimes you actually screw things up and make things a little bit worse, and you lose time, and that's really bad. But every time you can sort of push the thing forward a little bit, oh, it's the greatest. And then you stand in the back, like I did last night, and listen to a first audience watching a first group of actors for the first time ever in their lives doing something, and you hear that response. Oh man, you all got to write. You got to get a play on and stand in the back. And stand in the back of the theater. It's the greatest. It's the greatest. The greatest.
Do we have any questions? Yes.
Speaking from your knowledge of advertising, I'm interested in doing marketing for theater, and I've watched this whole process of doing Starcatcher go from Broadway where I saw it for the first time, and just see how it's grown so much just over social media and everything like that. Do you have anything to say about how that has been successful?
Did everyone hear the question? This is about the marketing, specifically the marketing for Peter and the Starcatcher, and you know, it's a fascinating question because some things are really, really easy to market, like a revival of Lerner and Lowe's My Fair Lady. You know, if you love My Fair Lady, you're going to go to see it, or Hugh Jackman in fill in the blank, because if you're going to, you know, that's it. Give me 2 tickets, you know, or and yet. And here's Peter and the Starcatchers. Peter and the Starcatchers sold, you know, 100 million copies. How many? You know, like 10 times more than Harry Potter. So you think. And Ridley Pearson is not.
You do right.
Is not a fake name for J.K. Rowling. It's really his name. He's really Ridley Pearson. You know, you think, oh well, there's all these millions of people who already know this story. It's going to be fantastic, and you know, we all live in a world where every day we're bombarded with a million different messages, people pulling our brain space in 1,000 different directions. And so, how do you actually pay attention to something that's new, that doesn't have a star, that maybe not the most familiar title in the world, that's a play that has music, but it's not really a musical, that people think is kind of fun off Broadway, but could never possibly play on Broadway because there's nothing else like it on Broadway, which means there's no place for it on Broadway. There's sort of a pendulums that swing in terms of styles, the same way the pendulum swings in terms of what we wear. So, you know, in my marketing, with my marketing hat on, I thought, you know, this is a tough nut to crack because it's hard to describe in one word. It's a big splash in a musical, or Disney presents. You know, or Cameron McIntosh presents, or it used to be David Merrick, and you think, okay, so those are the big productions, or a big name star, where a great answer to the question, well, who's in it, or a great answer to the question, what's it about? Even the question, what's it about, is a little bit tough because if you say, well, it's a reboot to Peter Pan, you're probably turning off half of your potential customers because half of the people, like me, for example, before I started on this project, I didn't care about Peter Pan. Peter Pan was something that I knew when I was a little boy, and I haven't thought about him since, except when I opened the peanut butter and you know, that's what Peter Pan. That's what Peter Pan is to me now. It's the peanut butter. I'm just a grown-up, you know. I don't have a Peter Pan complex. I'm not fascinated with Peter Pan. I got over Mary Martin, you know. It was, I could see the wires, you know. You know, look, mommy, she's on a wire. I was that kid. So you turn up half of your audience, and then you think, oh, it's, you know, then there's so it's children's theater. Well, no, it's not children's theater. I don't know how to write children's theater. Roger and Alex never meant this to be children's theater. They wanted adults playing all these parts. Well, there are only 4 young characters in this play out of 100 characters. All the 96 other characters are adults. But you think, oh, well, if it's not a woman playing the kid in green tights with a shock of red hair, and it's a male, oh, well, then it's going to be a boy. And it's a girl, so when they're young, it's kiddie theater. No, it's not kiddie theater. Well, so it's not appropriate for bringing my kid? Well, if your kid has cracked open a book, instead of going like this all day, then, you know, the kid might dig it, you know. If it's an ADD kid with, you know, a Ritalin prescription, you know, maybe you should leave him home. But you know, bring them and see what happens. You know, the theater's great. That's why I'm sitting here, is because my parents started dragging me to the theater when I was 3 years old and didn't stop, no matter how I behaved. You know, And eventually it changed my life, and here I am. So it was always a tough thing to describe, and God knows the producers, with the best will in the world, tried many different different ways in, sort of, like trying to take a city by siege, We'll try this gate, and then we'll try this gate, and we'll try climbing over this wall, and try getting around. So hard to make impressions, but little by little, I think over time, just being around makes you something that's considered a little bit differently than something that's brand new. We opened on Broadway when people thought it was never going to happen, and it got great reviews. And then rather quickly, it got 9 Tony nominations, which is a huge number for a play. And then it won 5 awards, and that all sort of happened sort of quickly, so it became kind of, oh, well, maybe this is something that we should consider going to see. Then it sort of stuck it out. All the other plays were closing. It's hard for plays to last on Broadway now. The economics are not in favor of plays. So, but we stuck it out. We'd still be there if it wasn't one crappy week last September. We stuck it out, and then the producers did this amazing thing, and they're in the back of this room right now, and they deserve real recognition for this, because this is not just brave, this is like brave with your money. So it's not theoretical, it's like real bravery. They said, okay, we've lost our lease on Broadway, but we're not going to end it here, because we're just at the point now where people are starting to know about us, that we're around, that we're here, we've done all of this marketing work. Why close now if there's some light at the end of this tunnel? And we think that there is. So we're going to take the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel, we're going to lift it up, take it out of this theater, and we're going to put it into this theater. The same thing. No cutbacks, nothing smaller, nothing reduced. And we're going to put it on, and people are going to come to see it. That's probably a little crazy, but theater people are always a little bit crazy. This is a business plan. None of this makes sense. And it's not expensive to take something from here on Broadway and move it off Broadway, because there's unions, and it's terribly expensive. And they did it anyway, and we're approaching our 200th performance at this new theater after playing 350 performances on Broadway and 100 performances off Broadway before that. This is going to, this play will have played more in New York than most plays by the time it runs its course. And here we are in Denver, and it's playing at Utah Shakespeare Festival, and Disney is now thinking about making a film of the novel that they sort of were not so interested in, but then they came to see the play and it reinvigorated their interest. And we all have gainful employment, and we all get to meet you. So, and this is part of the marketing too, right? We're here doing this because we want you to talk to your friends about it, but you're here because you're sort of interested in this thing because you've heard about it. So we keep on building on this thing, and I suppose that's the best way to market a play. It always has been, absent the big headline thing where you just take one ad and you sell out. Bruce Springsteen, one night only. If you don't have that, you know the grassroots is nothing like it, because word of mouth is the thing that works. So, feel free to discuss us.
Go out and tell everyone you know. I'd like to thank Rick Elice and Ridley Pearson for being with us today.